I'm delighted to welcome Vanessa Ugatti today, who is a true worth expert. And of course, the first question has to be, what is a true worth? What do we mean by true worth, Vanessa?
So I would say the true worth rather than a true worth, because I don't know if there's anybody else out there. I expect there are. So to me, true worth is about people recognizing the value of the service that they provide and not going into those behaviors of discounting and over-servicing, which cause them then to lose money. And of course, it is a challenge because how one person sees the value might differ from how somebody else sees it. So that's why it's so important for the person themselves to see what the value is that they provide and be able to articulate that with their clients and be clear on who their clients are and equally who their clients are not. Because as you know, and I both know, sorry, I'm a bit croaky today. As we both know, there were always people out there who are trying to get something for nothing or something cheaply, but that isn't about the whole value. But there are other people who will look at your prices and think, oh, no, that's no problem at all. So it's not an exact science. I'm probably not even answering the question because it isn't an exact science. It's how you, the provider, perceives the value that you give and the results you know you can get working with people that determines, in my opinion, what your true worth is.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because, as you say, there's so many aspects to it, but also it's what the person feels. So there's a lot of people like myself who came from a volunteering background and giving away knowledge, on a volunteer basis, and then circumstances change and then find themselves having to make a charge for the same service. So where do you start? How do you value what your true worth is? Well, I believe you have a formula. Take us through your formula, Vanessa.
So yes, I do. In fact, the formula is the true worth methodology. It started off actually as an equation, which was just 3 parts to it, which was understand your value, plus communicate your value, plus confident delivering fees equals charging what you're worth. But I realized over quite a long period of time that there was more to it than that, because you have to look at it right from the very beginning of the sales process, if you like, right through to getting paid as well. So I was already calling my stuff true worth. So then it became obvious to take that true worth acronym and turn that into the methodology. So the first part of true worth stands for take charge. And what I see businesses not doing when it comes to the sales side is they're not taking charge of those conversations with their prospects. And that's where the problem lies, because if they don't take charge right from the beginning, and they don't have the right conversations with clients at the right time, and they don't talk about the fees they're charging, and if the scope changes and they don't go back and have another conversation, and if they don't bill on time, and if they don't then follow up if they're not being paid, they are not in charge. And so many people don't do that because when they go into business, they don't have business knowledge, actually. So you said you come from a volunteering background, and of course that gives you a way of being and habits that you would normally do it, as you say, not charging for things. Other people have got different backgrounds, but either way, a lot of people are just not confident with our whole sales process because they're good at what they do, whatever their business is, but they haven't really been trained in this stuff. And there can be a lot of fear going on. So there's all sorts of stuff internally that is going on in people's heads, which is determining whether or not they actually charge their true worth. And so we have to get to grips with what's going on in the person's head for them to have a chance to be able to charge effectively. Because if they've got negative behaviors going on or negative thoughts going on in their mind, that will definitely impact on their charging. So in your case, somebody who was used to doing work that was voluntary work and giving away oodles of information that probably had enormous value for people, but because it was voluntary, it wasn't being charged for, then of course, when you then have to go into charging for people, that you're coming from a difficult position because you're almost further back than other people, because your habit will be not to charge for things, not because there's anything wrong with what you're doing. That was just the setup, being voluntary work. And I guess I'm going to clear my throat. I guess you could draw an analogy between legal aid and private client work if we're talking about the law. So people who are doing legal aid, or solicitors who are doing legal aid work and private client work, have problems with charging, because obviously with the legal aid work, they're not having to have conversations with the clients about money because it's nothing to do with the client. But when they're talking to private clients, they do have to have those conversations. And the difference between what legal aid pays and what they should be charging in the private client work is so big that they won't be confident, they won't be comfortable with it. And I could tell stories about people I've worked with where that's been the case. And that's quite logical, they wouldn't be. But their perception of the value is, should we say, skewed or false? Because what they're being paid on legal aid is really not a lot of money. I don't know who's going to hear this, but I've said it anyway. I feel quite strongly about that quite often people are working incredibly long hours on legal aid, but they're not necessarily getting paid terribly well for it. And they're having to deal with clients who don't value them because the clients aren't actually paying for it. And that's a key one as well.
When people pay for something, it's like what's the saying? If people don't have skin in the game, then they don't value and appreciate the thing. Doesn't matter whether it's buying a car or professional services, whatever it is. People put a value, put a judgment really on the value. So if you're buying something that's, I don't know, $10 versus something that's $100, it could be the same thing. But it depends on the person's perception of, what they feel something is worth, both from the person who's selling and the person who's buying.
Absolutely, that's definitely the case, Elaine. So it is complicated because we're dealing with human beings, and as I always say, human beings are complex, irrational, and emotional, and that's on a good day. So, and we all are, and we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know what our blind spots are, and you could say any number of things about this. So why do intellectually intelligent people do stupid things or behave in a way that is really not very intelligent? It's because intellectual ability and business skills, for example, are completely different skill sets, and it almost means you almost need to have two different characters to do the same, those two different skills. Don't you think? I mean, you must have seen this because obviously you worked in law firms, haven't you, over many years? So
yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, 30 odd years I've been involved with the legal practices and accountancy practices, legal firms and accountancy practices, and and other organisations as well as a business mentor. So I've seen it all over the years. The volunteering that I did was in health and wellbeing space, and so as you say, the contrast between legal aid and private client work, the contrast between private healthcare and National Health Service, it's the same kind of thing. Everybody expects something for nothing because they've been conditioned by the National Health Service. They think they're not paying because at the point of use, it's not paid in England, although people have paid, all through their life through the social security payment. So they actually do pay for it. But it's a similar kind of conversation. Why did you end up supporting professional service firms in particular, Vanessa? Why that industry sector?
So when I started creating this True Worth methodology, I didn't actually know that I was going to be creating this. I went on a course that said you needed to have a niche, and they asked us to write down a whole load of set of our interests, from the least interest to the greatest interest. And I scribbled down all these answers, and I can't remember any of them other than the fact that I'd put down this thing about value or worth. But at the time, I had no idea where that had come from. I didn't know consciously that that's what I was going to be doing. But the people running this program said, oh, that's marketable. So I said, okay, you're the expert. I'm going to take a leap of faith, and I'm going to go out networking and, the in-person networking. And we're talking about 10 years ago. And so I did. And of course, you always saw a lot of professionals at in-person networking. So I asked those people, they were the obvious people to ask really, whether they had challenges around charging. And I found out really, really quickly that underestimating, undercharging, discounting, over-servicing were all commonplace problems amongst highly experienced professionals. And so that was my first bit of evidence that I was on the right track, even though I didn't know that that's what I was going to be doing. So I'll tell you the rest of the story because it will all make sense then, I think. So then I came and I looked at clients I'd been working with, and I discovered I'd been helping some of them with their charging, because I was working on people's mindset and confidence. And I hadn't even realized I'd been doing that. So it's amazing what we do unconsciously, we don't know. And that's such a big thing in terms of the whole charging thing. What are people doing unconsciously that are causing them problems? And then after that, I decided to shine the spotlight on myself. And that's when I discovered, to my horror, that I was absolutely clueless when it came to charging, because I was embarrassed. Talking about money, I didn't understand my value. I had no clue what my value was. I didn't really know what I knew or what I could do or how I could really help people. So a whole bunch of reasons. And I also sort of came up with this phrase, and I'm sure other people probably use it, heart-led people. So I'm a heart-led person, and heart-led people want to help people. And quite often it's at their own expense. But they don't realize that because it's such a strong driver within them. They don't actually realize they're harming themselves. And so that was quite a painful experience to have, but it also was the point at which I realized exactly why I needed to be doing this subject and why my subconscious mind had brought it forward and put it down in that list, because the subconscious mind, as I'm sure you know, Elaine, is incredibly powerful, and it knows so much about us that we don't actually know about ourselves, because we're not in touch the whole time with our subconscious mind, and all our knowledge and information is stored there rather than in the conscious mind, so we don't necessarily know what we don't know or what is stored in there. So that's what happened. And then it was shortly after that when I was in bed, half awake and half asleep, you know, that sort of nice drowsy feeling that we've all experienced. And that's when the conscious mind has gone to sleep, but the subconscious mind is still awake. And this formula appeared in mind, that UV plus CV plus CD equals CW formula appeared in my mind. And I knew exactly what it meant, even though I didn't know how I did. And I also knew it was correct, even though I didn't know how I did. So that's where it all started from. And then, as I say, later on, it became true worth, because I realized I was doing a lot more than just those three parts to it. So I did start talking about the true worth methodology, and then only got to point one, didn't I? And then we veered off, which is not a problem.
That's absolutely fine. Let's just backtrack a bit. So we know what you do now. You help professional service firms in particular with their finding their true worth. You've also alluded to the fact that you're a coach of some description. So tell us a bit about the coaching. How did you become a coach or a mentor, or how did you make that transition? What were you doing before that led you to where you are now? Tell us the stepping stones.
Gosh, I don't know if I can even remember, to be honest with you, because it's just I've been one of those people who has followed my heart, and I didn't have a plan. I followed my heart and my intuition as to where I was going and what I was doing. So going way back to 1997, I was sent on a presentation skills course for a firm I was working with at the time, before I was working for myself. And that's when I discovered public speaking, and there was a connection there for me. And then there was a whole thing about training people, and I got involved in training. And then from that came the coaching, but it was never something that was planned. And actually, I believe it's just a natural ability that I have within me to help people be the best they can be. And because I'm so intuitive and sensitive, it's almost like I can read people's minds. So I say things to them, and they say, you're absolutely spot on, but they hadn't realized it themselves. That's really quite difficult to explain. I don't know if you can teach that, or if anybody can be taught that. So it just came about as a result of taking the next step and doing the next thing. And yes, I did go on NLP courses and things of that nature. I didn't do a formal coaching qualification because I didn't want to be boxed in, because I'm not a person who can just be limited. I have to allow what comes through me to be shared with the client or clients, because that's how I get the best results. So it's just been a natural journey, if you like, from discovering this public speaking to getting involved in training and then getting involved in doing one-to-one stuff, and having a natural ability, as I said, to understand what's going on in people's minds and help them see for themselves what's going on so that they can make the changes they need to make to get different results, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. The intuition piece, I think, is big with a lot of us. We just know, but we don't know how we know. We just know stuff. And similar kind of thing with me. I've never had a plan. I don't ever intend having a plan. I just go with the flow. What happens, happens. Obviously, not completely sailing on the wind, but things just happen naturally. The universe has got amazing ways of showing us what we need, and following our intuition is a big part of that. That's another reason also I don't call myself a coach. I am a qualified coach, but I've never really, gone out there on the street, as it were, as a coach. I'm more of a mentor, because like you, with the experience, sharing stories, I think, are really powerful, and giving examples to people how things have happened in our own lives. So we're kind of walking the talk, aren't we? Which is what I do with their health and well-being in particular. So how do people get hold of you? What's the best way to get hold of you, Vanessa?
So they can get to my website, thetrueworthexpert.com. If you Google Vanessa Ugatti, which is Ugatti, I'm the only one in the world. So it won't be difficult to find me. And I'm all over LinkedIn on a regular basis. So you can also get to me via LinkedIn.
Funny you say that about the only one in the world. I Google myself from time to time. I was taught this many years ago, check up on what what's going on in the public about you. And I'm all over Google. However, I also found another Elaine Godley, who was in prison. She'd been a criminal in America somewhere. So
oh no, you don't want that.
Yeah. A few pages in, I found this Elaine Godley. So you never know. You never know.
Oh dear, that's not so good.
no, but we have a sense of humour, and keep it all into perspective.
Absolutely.
So, before we wrap up, Vanessa, what advice would you give to somebody who is completely green about charging? They've got a service, they've got a product. Where do they start? Phoning you, obviously, but
yeah, absolutely.
What tips can you give?
Well, there is a little book that they can get through my website called How to Get Paid Your True Worth. I think you have to make a decision. If you're setting up in business, you have to make a decision to start as you mean to go along, because otherwise you spend years trying to play catch up, if people don't charge properly at the beginning. But it's very difficult, because for all the reasons I've already said, because people don't really know what their value is. So, you have to make a decision. Are you serious about your business? In which case, you need to get some help right at the beginning, or are you just playing at it, in which case you can catch up later on if you want to. I don't tend to work with people who are startups anyway. I tend to work with established businesses rather than startups, but that doesn't mean to say I wouldn't, because it would just depend on the person. Whether they were open to it or not.
Yeah, and you also do public speaking, you mentioned. So what type of audiences do you like speaking to?
Audiences that are open to the subject. So I think any audience where sales are important and charging are important would be audiences for me. So it'd be mainly service-based audiences, though, service-based businesses.
Cool, excellent. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, Vanessa. So just remind us of your website address for people to hop onto, and also to download the free booklet you were talking about.
It's thetrueworthexpert.com.
Actually,
it's not a download. It's more. It's a real little book, so they need to just pay a bit of postage and packing if they want it.
Oh, I see. Marvelous.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Lovely speaking with you, Vanessa. Thank you for your time today.
Not at all. Thank you very much for having me, Elaine. Fantastic.